Alright, this is number 16, part 1 in the Prager Rational Bible. Alright, let's begin. Here's a little bit of a note before he gets to verse 1. Note to the reader, since the translation spells the name of the lead rebel against Moses, Korah, those unfamiliar with Hebrew, like me, will pronounce his name Korah, as they will assume that the H is silent, like the H at the end of the word Torah. And this is why the commentary spelling differs from the translation spell it. So Prager spells it the old way, Korach, where the CH is pronounced like the CH in Hanukkah, or the CH in the composer Bach, the way the name is pronounced in Hebrew. So I guess actually it would be Korach. Alright, but go ahead and just read it as Korah. Verse 1. Now Korah, the son of Izhar, the son of Kohath of Levi, betook himself along with Dathan and Abiram, sons of Eliab, and On, the sons of Peleth, descendants of Reuben, to rise up against Moses. So this chapter describes two rebellions against Moses and Aaron. One is from among the Levites. Its leader, Korah, came from a distinguished family. He was a cousin of Moses, and his birth was recorded in the book of Exodus 6:21, only one verse after Moses' birth. And he apparently resented the fact that only the Levites who were descended from Aaron could be priests. And the other rebellion came from the tribe of Reuben. As the descendants of Reuben, the firstborn of Jacob, they resented being kept out of political power. Three rebels identified in this verse appear in the chapter. On, son of Peleth, is not again mentioned. I guess there's a little footnote, so we'll go see what that says in the index. I may not always do this with footnotes, but sometimes I might. So, actually, there's a reference to the Talmud here, but it records a tradition that while On participated in the rebellion at its outset, his wife recognized Korach's self-serving motives and convinced her husband not to further involve himself with the rebellion. So On, therefore, was spared from the punishment that the leaders of the revolt would soon suffer. And I have no idea when this tradition arose, but maybe it would have just interested some readers. See Talmud, Sanhedrin 109b. Okay. Alright, well, there's just a little extra note about this On guy. Alright, but these guys rise up against Moses together with 250 Israelites, chieftains of the community, chosen in the assembly, men of repute. Now, it was not just the Levites, but various leaders of the Israelite community who rose up against Moses. And it would be as if some of the most powerful individuals in modern society tried to overthrow a president or a prime minister. It amounted to an attempt at what we would call today a coup d'etat. Yeah, coup, where you try to take over being in power, and you rise up against the one who's in power. Yeah, and sometimes you might kill that person to become the leader. Yeah. Alright, most fame is meaningless. So the Torah could have easily ended the description of the rebels before these words, that these leaders who joined with Korah and them were men of repute. Why add men of repute here? And there may be a lesson here. The Hebrew phrase translated here as men of repute, Anshe Shem, however you say that, but Hebrew, it literally means men of name, or as we would put it, well-known or famous. Basically, these guys were famous in the Israelite community, if you will. And no achievements are ascribed to these individuals, but maybe perhaps they were famous solely because of their position and titles. And that's quite common. Many people who become famous do so because they want to be famous, to be seen as prominent, and not because they've done anything important or even sought to do anything important. Kind of wonder, how did the Kardashians become famous? I mean, they just had a show and there you go. I mean, what did they really do? I guess they look good, and that's another thing. If you look pretty good, you can also become famous. So, I don't know. And the same word name is also used in Genesis 11:4 to describe the people who built the Tower of Babel. They wanted to make a name for themselves by building a tower so tall it reached the heavens. And this is a classic example. That is a classic example of this point. There is little or no significance to constructing the tallest building. It does not conquer any disease. It does not decrease poverty, and in one way or another improve the human condition. Its sole purpose is to make a name for an individual or a country. And to this day, countries compete with one another to erect the tallest building in the world. Cities compete with one another to erect the tallest structure in their country. To what end? Other than fame? And there are many individuals for whom fame is greater than nearly any other yearning, even more than wealth or power, though they're often related, because, you get famous, you end up getting those things, usually. Now, why do so many people yearn for fame? Aside from ego gratification and the various trappings of fame, being widely recognized makes people feel important, and feeling important gives one's life meaning. And aside from food, people yearn for meaning more than for anything else, more than wealth or even sex or money. Well, yeah, wealth. There you go. And Karl Marx, posited economics. Freud posited sex, for meaning. And Viktor Frankl, the author of the book Man's Search for Meaning, he posited meaning as the animating factor in human life, and I agree with Frankl. And also Dennis Prager on PragerU has a video, why are so many young people unhappy? And he gives the reason, probably because they really have no meaning. Yeah, it's having no God, no country, and no, nation. No religion or whatever, and no hope or anything to believe in. But what does that leave them with? No meaning. But there's always Instagram. I'm Dennis Prager. Yeah, it's a good video. I might put that in the description. And therefore, for most people, being famous means that they matter. And a human being fears not mattering. But the fame many people attain doesn't often necessarily mean a person matters. In fact, most people who do things that really matter, such as raising good children, hopefully godly children, I guess, caring for the sick, performing life-enhancing medical research, figuring out how to yield more crops per acre, motivating others to do good. Usually a lot of people who do these things are not famous. Or, as I put it in the essay on fame in Genesis 11:4, the famous are rarely significant, and the significant are rarely famous. Now, there are some who do some great things who may not have been famous in their time, but maybe they become famous after they're dead. Maybe sometimes that also happens. Yeah. Alright, and verse 3. They combined against Moses and Aaron and said to them, "You've gone too far." And the rebellion was directed at those who occupied the most significant roles in the Israelite community, the prophet Moses and the priest Aaron. The Hebrew phrase translated as "you have gone too far," Rav Lakim, however you say that, it means literally too much for you. The rebels claimed that Moses and Aaron had acquired too much power. Alright, now this essay is going to take up a good chunk of this first part of the video. Alright. And then there'll be a little bit more afterwards, and then I'll stop there. So just bear with me for this long essay. The Torah rejects egalitarianism. For all in the community are holy, all of them, and that was part of their objection. Now there may be no story in the Torah more relevant to the modern times than Korah's rebellion. Korah represents both human nature and the modern world's value system, unfortunately, much more so than Moses and the Torah do. Korah is the quintessential egalitarian, one who believes that all men are not only created equal, a basic Torah position, and of course Thomas Jefferson echoed that in the Declaration of Independence, but not only, believing that, but also all men should be regarded as equal no matter what they do. Yeah, they should be equal regardless. Yeah, no matter what. And no one and no culture is better than any other person or any other culture. Yeah, everything is all equal, basically. Yeah. And I suspect that most moderners, if they asked what was really wrong with Korah's argument, would have no response. And deep down, they sympathize with his argument. Yeah, basically saying all the people were holy. No, this chapter shows that really most are not. Yeah. I mean, they definitely showed themselves not to be holy in 14 when they refused to go into the promised land. And so now they're going to die in the wilderness. So that, and only really Joshua and Caleb proved to be the holy ones who believed in God when it comes to them getting the promised land. Now, of course, Aaron and Moses were also holy men as well. Yeah, but most of the people, no. And these guys definitely were not. Korah's argument in my paraphrase, all of the community is holy, all of them. Who are you, Moses and Aaron, to set yourselves above us? And that's really the egalitarian argument that permeates modern culture. We're all equal in our holiness and our goodness and in just about every other way. No one is better than anyone else or is to be regarded as such. Not even the man and his brother who led the Jews out of Egypt and who talked directly with God. And an example of egalitarianism in the moral realm is the claim that all cultures and civilizations are morally equivalent, even though the Western civilization has actually achieved more in virtually every realm of life and has done more good for human rights, for women's equality, for personal and societal freedom, scientific, medical, and material progress. And egalitarians deny that Western civilization is superior to other cultures. And that is why there was a widespread anger whenever U.S. President Ronald Reagan, when he labeled the Soviet Union as an evil empire. Yeah, which it was. It was communist. It was killing people. And the Koraks of that time asked, in effect, basically, who are you, Ronald Reagan, to set America on a moral plane above another country? Even though the Soviet Union was a tyranny that spread tyranny all over the world, and America was a free society that was more responsible for spreading and preserving freedom than any other nation. Had that decades-long Cold War against the Soviet Union, trying to stop communism. Yeah, which has done more to crush freedom and destroy people's lives than probably almost any other thing on the planet. Yeah. I wonder if Karl Marx would have any regrets of those ideas, of communism, if he were still around today. Yeah, but anyway, of what happened when his ideas were put into action. Yep. But egalitarian thinking is also applied to individuals. Who are, if any of us, are to judge another person? Even though, ironically, you're actually judging. The argument goes, now it's true that in general, judging people as opposed to judging their actions is perilous. Most people are morally complex. But if we can never say that a person or a country is evil, we can never say that a person or country is good. It would be absurd to maintain that there are good people or countries, but no bad ones. And yeah, you don't have evil without good. Yeah, and you don't have God if you don't have good. Yeah. And according to egalitarianism, no achievement is necessary and no excellence needs to be pursued in order for everyone to be considered. And Korak's phrase, holy, all of them. In essence, we need do nothing to be holy, or special, maybe in a secular parlance. And a modern example of this occurred in America in the 20th century, whenever it became common practice to award young people sports trophies not for winning, but for participating. And there's also a Prager video on this called Trophies Are for Winning, where there was a professional soccer player who did that video and basically saying that he's not a fan of participation trophies. Yeah, and ultimately, if you want a trophy, then work hard and win. Yep. And probably if he grew up, believing that you'll be rewarded if you just show up and participate, he said, if any of that stuff was drilled into his head, he probably never would have become a professional soccer player. So, but yeah, that's a good video. Now, one no longer had to be on the winning team or win an individual sport in order to be given a trophy. One merely just had to show up. Everyone, even those who played poorly, team members who didn't play, and those who excelled, received awards. Likewise, many American high schools ceased designating the highest achieving student in the graduating class valedictorian because the title signified that one student achieved more academically than all the other students, and that's not equality. Really? And this is the thinking that has led contemporary Western art galleries to exhibit meaningless art, political art, and art meant to shock, and scatological art, which is, manure and urine, pee and poo. Yeah, and the example, and the like. And there's some examples that are listed in the art contemporary art commentary to Exodus 20 verse 3, and in the end note. Yeah, the end note. So maybe I'll look at this little end note here. So here's some examples of some of this worthless art today. In 2011, a lifelike German sculpture depicting a police woman squatting and urinating. Even the puddle is sculpted. It actually received an award from a prestigious German foundation, the Linnemann Foundation for Fine Art. Yeah, no. In 2013, the Orange County Museum of Art in California placed a 28-foot sculpture of a dog outside the museum, where it periodically urinates a yellow fluid onto a museum wall. And then in 2016, one of the most prestigious art museums in the world, I've heard about this one, the Guggenheim in New York, it featured a pure gold working toilet bowl, which the visitors were actually invited to use, and the name of this exhibit was called America. So one could literally relieve oneself on America. Yeah, and I've heard this from another PragerU video called Everything the Left Touches It Destroys, or the left ruins everything, and he gave the example of modern art, and he mentioned that example of the toilet called America. So anyway, but better and worse art should be entirely a matter of personal taste and opinion. One prefers Rembrandt, and another prefers a canvas painted all white, or a menstrual blood exhibit. All art is equal. All artists are equal, and the opinions of those who assess art are equal. Well, I guess if you criticize this garbage, bleh, then I guess that doesn't matter. And this thinking is also animated social movements that seek to abolish material inequality, or I guess, income inequality. And their egalitarian ideal is that no one should have more money or more material possessions than anyone else. However, there's a great moral problem with this ideal. Serious pursuit of material egalitarianism eventually leads to violence. The French Revolution and communism are the two most obvious examples. And egalitarianism has been applied to animals and humans. Increasingly, a number of non-Bible-based Jews and non-Jews regard humans and animals as equally holy, arguing that there's no difference between the value of a human being and that of an animal, even though humans are created in the image of God and animals are not. But anyway, the egalitarians maintain that the Torah-based belief that humans are special is a speciesism, however you say that. And as I noted in Genesis, the American animal rights group PETA, which People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals, they initiated a campaign on behalf of vegetarianism called Holocaust on Your Plate, in which the organization morally equated the barbecuing of chickens with the burning of Jews in the Holocaust. And there's another end note here, but I'm not going to turn to that one. Likewise, Korach, they argued, all living beings are holy, all of them. Who is anyone to set human beings above animals? Well, God does. Yeah, human beings are created in God's image. Now, the Torah holds that all people are created equal and all people are to be equal before the law. Indeed, one of the Torah's doctrines which changed the world was that all human beings, here we go, are created in the image of God. And no other civilization in the world held this doctrine at the time of the Torah, and those that eventually adopted it took it from the Torah. And until well into the 20th century, for example, one of the oldest religions of the world, Hinduism, was based on a caste system. Human beings were born into one of four castes in descending order. They were Brahmins, which is the highest, and the I may have trouble saying this, Kshatriyas, however you say that, and then yeah, Vaishyas and Sudras, and beneath them all were the people known as the untouchables or the Dalit. And all humans are created equal, but the Torah rejects egalitarianism. It affirms that some people are morally better and holier and hold higher positions like parents than others. And also egalitarianism as well. Also the idea that men and women can be equal in the same roles, but that's not true either. Men and women have different roles. Men can be pastors, women can be not. Yeah, women cannot be pastors. Yep, people don't like that, but that's how it is. Yeah. And just to cite what is probably the best known example in the Torah, God deemed Noah a better person than anyone else in his generation. Genesis 6:8 through 9. And so too the notion of chosenness, the central doctrine of the Torah regarding the Jews, though it never meant Jews are inherently better than anyone else or that only Jews can go to heaven, is not an egalitarian doctrine, given that the Jews have a uniquely holy calling. Leviticus 19:2. And as we'll see, when Moses called upon God to adjudicate between him and Korach, God made his decision against Korach's egalitarianism very clear. So in the final analysis, egalitarianism is a form of idol worship because it leads to equating man and God. How could it not be? At its core, egalitarianism is an attempt to overthrow hierarchy and authority, including especially God. Egalitarianism ultimately emanates from a desire not to be judged, and in order for there to be no judgment, there cannot be a judge. Yet the very first description of God in the Torah is that he is the judge of all the earth. Genesis 18:25. A moral civilization cannot survive the breakdown of hierarchical, it's hard to say that, authority that egalitarianism advocates. And that is why God destroyed Korach and his followers. Were God to destroy all Korachs, the world population, and certainly many of its opinion leaders would decline. In fact, the Korach rebellion may have been the last time egalitarians lost so decisively, until the American Revolution, whose values were largely rooted in the Hebrew Bible, Old Testament, and therefore placed greater emphasis on liberty rather than equality. And like the Torah, the American Declaration of Independence affirmed all men are created equal, which would include slaves, of course, even though, of course, founders had slaves, but they still believed in freedom. So they may not have been consistent, but they still believed in that. And, that was just common still to have slaves at the time. But anyway, but eventually that would be dealt with. But unlike the French Revolution, whose motto was liberty, equality, and fraternity, the American Declaration of Independence doesn't even contain the word equality, and its three ideals are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And every American coin dating back to the 18th century has featured the word liberty, but not equality. And since the 19th century, every American coin has had the words liberty, in God we trust, and e pluribus unum. It's kind of hard to say that, but it's a Latin phrase from many one, which again not equality. And Prager calls this the American Trinity. And the Torah wants, as did the American Revolution, that people be free virtually Every American founder acknowledged that slavery violated that ideal, and therefore none emphasized equality being created equal. There isn't even a word for equality in biblical Hebrew. Freedom and equality are not compatible goals. In order for everyone to be equal, liberty must be suppressed. And probably this would be more of like equity, which would be equal in outcome, which ultimately would be communism. Yeah, and you would definitely have no liberty, obviously. Freedom, by definition, inevitably produces inequality, because some people have greater talents, some work harder, some have more luck. Well, there's really no such thing as luck, but anyway, and so forth. Yeah, because because the Lord has planned the end from the beginning. So the French Revolution, which emphasized equality, resulted in chaos, torture, terror, and murder. And the iconic symbol of the French Revolution is the guillotine. Yeah, where you would get that device that would, cut your head off, or whatever. And the American Revolution produced the freest society in the world, though if it ever comes to hold equality as a supreme value, it will not remain so. And the iconic symbol of the American Revolution is the Liberty Bell. Irony of ironies, while France built the Statue of Liberty, it gave it to America. So the American Revolution was rooted in the Bible. And a British-American author, Os Guinness, however you say that, he wrote this. Historically, it was the Exodus Revolution and not the French Revolution that lay behind the genius of America's ordered freedom. And a rabbi in the Jerusalem Post summed it up. The American Revolution was a religious revolution. And unlike the American Revolution, which was rooted in belief in the Creator, the Declaration of Independence states human beings' inalienable rights come from the Creator. The French Revolution was radically secular and anti-religious. For the French revolutionaries, human rights did not come from the Creator, but from the state. And one of the first things that the French regime did after the French Revolution was massacre priests and destroy churches. And one of the first things that America's first president, George Washington, did was send a note of appreciation to a synagogue. And during a 48-hour period beginning on September 2nd, 1792, the French mobs killed 3 church bishops and more than 200 priests. Priests and nuns were drowned and otherwise murdered in mass executions, and more than 500 priests died from starvation and maltreatment in the port of Roquefort. And within a few years of the French Revolution, some 20,000 priests were forced to leave the priesthood, and between 6,000 to 9,000 agreed to, or they were forced to marry. And though the motto of the French Revolution was liberty, equality, and fraternity, its aiming value was equality. And as the German Jewish writer Hannah Arendt said, it was the French and not the American Revolution that set the world on fire. And since that time in the West and among the many non-Westerners influenced by Western thought, there is almost no area of life in which equality has not been elevated above other values. And no one better understood the conflict between egalitarianism and liberty than egalitarians. And this is why they suppress liberty whenever and wherever they assume power. The French, the Russian, the Chinese revolutions were all rooted in anti-religious secularism. Each instituted a reign of terror. The last two resulting in the murder of about 100 million people. Yeah. Of course, Russian, Chinese. Yeah, you would have, these communist regimes. Yep, and human beings are not, as Korach and modern egalitarians would have it, they're not all equally holy. And some people do indeed achieve greater holiness than other people. Yeah, now, holiness is earned through holy, moral, and ethical behavior. Yeah, well, it's only through the Holy Spirit that somebody could become really more holy. Yeah, you're not holy apart from Christ. Yeah. Moses earned it. Yeah, well, he believed God. Yeah, and he definitely obeyed God. So, yeah, therefore he was holy before God. But, wasn't perfect. Yeah, but because of the sacrifice of Christ, you would be looked at as holy, and your lifestyle would show more and more holiness. Yeah, but you'll only be perfectly holy whenever you're in heaven. Yeah, in the new heaven and the new earth when you get the new glorified body. Yeah, but of course Korach was definitely not holy, obviously. Alright, well that was a long essay, but we got through it. Alright, read a little bit more and then I'll end part 1. Is God in everyone? Yeah, just some more of the objection that the people were holy and the Lord is in their midst. In our time, and the Lord is in their midst would read, God is in everyone. And this is another egalitarian claim. And if it means everyone is created in God's image, well then the assertion is unsaleable. But that's not what it generally means, just as it was not what the rebels meant. They meant that Moses and Aaron could not be holier than anyone because God is in every Israelite's midst. And both Moses and Aaron were on a holier plane than others because God had appointed them and because of Moses' character. Yeah, in chapter 12 it said Moses was a humble man, which is a characteristic of holiness, by the way. And we don't know enough about Aaron to assess his character. And as regard to Moses' character, 3 episodes from Moses' early life recounted in Exodus 2, 11 through 17, testify to his elevated character. He attacked and killed an Egyptian slave overseer who was beating a Hebrew slave, and he also berated an Israelite who was striking another Israelite, and he stood up for non-Israelites, Midianite women, no less, who were being bullied by male shepherds. And Korach was convinced that God was on his side, and many people have done evil while claiming or even believing that God was on their side. The last words heard by the 300 people on the 4 airplanes hijacked and crashed by the Islamic terrorists on September 11, 2001 were Allahu Akbar, which is Allah is the greatest. And as they murdered the individuals and families, they were certain that God, of course for them Allah, was pleased with them. No, Allah does not exist. And this underscores a point made repeatedly in this commentary. When people say that they believe in God, we know nothing about them, and we know nothing about their God or their moral values. Or probably even when people would say they are Christians. Because you got a lot of people who say that they are Christians, and yet there's no evidence. Or as Paul Washer says, and they live like devils. Yeah, so you need to know what God they believe in, what they believe in. Yeah, same thing if you're claiming to be a Christian. You claim to believe in Jesus, God. Well, what God? Jesus. Yeah, who is actually God? What do you believe in? Is it the God of the Torah? New Testament ultimately too. Is it the God who revealed the Ten Commandments? Does the God in whom they believe judge the behavior of all human beings and according to one moral standard? Yeah, which that's true. And all of us fall short of that standard, which is why we need a Savior. And the great innovation of the Torah is not only monotheism, but ethical monotheism. And as the prominent historian of religion, Bart Ehrman, who is not a believer, but he has admitted that the New Testament manuscripts are reliable, but he's not a believer. But anyway, Bart Ehrman, he said, he's a professor of religious studies at the University of North Carolina, but he wrote about ancient religion. He said, there was a scant role for ethics. Ethics had little to do with religion. I may look at that footnote, end note there, just to see where that was from. So, what number was that one? Okay, that was end note number 7. Bart D. Ehrman, The Triumph of Christianity, How a Forbidden Religion Swept the World. Okay. Why then do you raise yourselves above the Lord's congregation? So this is but one more expression of the rejection of the hierarchy and the authority that characterized the Korach rebellion. Korach could not have cared less about the Lord's congregation. The Israelites are at the very least Israel's leaders. Like virtually every rebel in the name of equality, Korach claimed to care about the people, but he was only interested in attaining power. Every mass murderer of the 20th century, I guess particularly the communists, with the exception of Hitler. Now, of course, Hitler was not a communist, but anyway. But these communist leaders, they came to power preaching equality. Yeah, well, that didn't happen. Well, everyone pretty much became equally poor and miserable except the ones at the top. And given the human instinct to prefer equality rather than liberty, these individuals often had great public support. Yep, sadly. And yet they murdered people. Yep, some college students could wear a Che Guevara shirt, and yet he was like Fidel Castro's right-hand man, I guess. Yeah, but he murdered people. Yep, and verse 4. When Moses heard this, he fell on his face. Some commentators suggest that Moses prostrated himself and prayed to God for advice and help. Another possibility is that Moses fell in frustration and despair, both for himself and for the people. And as will become clear, Moses' despair was not primarily for himself, but for his people. And perhaps after pleading with God so many times on their behalf, he feared that this time the Israelites were really doomed. Verse 5, and then he spoke to Korah and all of his company, saying this, come morning, and the Lord will make known who he is and who is holy, and he will grant access to himself. He will grant access to the one he has chosen. In realizing that arguing would be fatal, Moses did not respond to Korach's arguments. Instead, he made the most logical offer. See both parties claimed God's support, and let God decide who was right. Do this, you, Korah, and all your band, take fire pans, and tomorrow put fire in them and lay incense on them before the Lord, and then the man whom the Lord chooses shall be the Holy One. You have gone too far, sons of Levi. And Moses used the same expression, you have gone too far, Rav Lakum, that Korach and his followers used against him and Moses in verse 3. Yeah, and a famous Talmudic aphorism teaches this. A fault that you have, don't attribute to others. And Korach was the one who wanted power, while Moses had repeatedly pleaded with God not to put him in a position of power. And finally, verse 8, and then I'll end here for part 1. Moses said further to Korah, "Hear me, sons of Levi." And Moses again referred to a segment of the rebels by its tribal affiliation to emphasize that of all people, the Levites should not have rebelled against their leaders because they already had an exalted position. But an exalted position means little to those who seek more power and wealth or fame. Yep, and then the next section, going into part 2, ingratitude as the source of evil and unhappiness. Alright, and Lord willing, I'll get to this final part next time. It might be a little bit shorter. Yeah, because at least there's no long essay in part 2. But Lord willing, I'll get there, but until then, may God bless you in the grace and mercy won by Jesus, the love of God, and the fellowship of the Holy Spirit be with you all.